Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say. Well, in the past 24 hours, efforts by the US authorities to take on those they say are online pirates has become much more real. The website MegaUpload, which many of you will know, has been hauled down. Hackers have consequently attacked websites belonging to the FBI. And all this comes at the end of a week when many of you around the world have been debating these proposed bills in Washington designed to take on online piracy. Critics say they don't understand the internet, they don't understand the changing nature of ownership. Others, though, who support the bill say, look, we have to take on the online pirates and the US government is right to try and do it. Wherever you're watching in the world, not just in America, you're very welcome to take part as we discuss all of these issues. Well, let's bring you right up to date with where we are in Washington on these two bills proposed to take on online piracy. In the last couple of minutes, the US Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, says he's going to postpone a test vote next week on the bill that's going through the Senate. Now, you may have heard people talking about SOPA and PIPA. It's PIPA that's going through the Senate, SOPA through the House of Representatives. He confirms that half a dozen senators who sponsored the measure say they oppose it, but Reid says he's optimistic about reaching a compromise that protects Americans' intellectual property and allows openness and innovation. But let's take those two bills as they are, SOPA and PIPA. The first key point is that anyone found guilty of streaming copyrighted content without permission 10 times or more in 6 months should face 5 years in jail. Second, court orders could be placed against any site accused of enabling or facilitating piracy. And to be clear, that appears to include anyone who may link to a site involved in online piracy. And third, US-based internet service providers, payment processors and advertisers would be outlawed from doing business with alleged copyright infringers. So lots to digest there. I wonder if you're looking at that and thinking, good on the US government, I could do with something like that in my country. You're very welcome to tell us. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Let us start with three guests joining us from Nairobi, from Cairo and from Washington, D.C. We've also got a guest in London. Let's start with her. Lindsay is live with us. Hi, Lindsay. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the organisation that you represent.
Well, first of all, I'm a novelist. I've been a novelist for 20 years, so I earn my living from what I produce, and therefore I'm cheering this legislation if it goes through. I'm also, at the moment, I'm chair of the Society of Authors in Britain, so I'm speaking for all the authors who are our members, and indeed for any other authors that we can represent. You wouldn't expect to get free biscuits from a biscuit factory, would you? And it's exactly the same with books and I think probably with music and maybe other things as well. So from my point of view, yes, I very much welcome what's being attempted in America.
Well, let's bring in Conrad in Nairobi, Scott also in Washington, D.C. Scott, good to speak to you. You were on What Have You Say's radio edition a couple of days ago. Tell us about your organisation and whether you agree with Lindsay.
We are the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. We are the U.S. counterpart for BEC2. We represent the men and women who work behind the scenes in motion pictures and television. And yes, we do agree with Lindsay. Our members and their employment are affected by the specter of piracy. And we're very much hoping for some sort of reasonable legislation that both protects the intellectual property rights of our members, as well as preserving a free and open internet.
Listening to you both is Conrad. Conrad, you run a software company. What would you say to Lindsay and Scott?
To some extent, I agree with them. My issue is not really the substance of the law, because the substance is very valid. My problem is the way of going about it, because I think, as with all laws, the devil is in the details. And some of the details, I think, horrify me in terms of how they can be abused. So to that level, I oppose some of its measures.
Lindsay, are you worried this may be abused, these kind of laws?
I think the problem for me is that people have tried already to stop piracy and the attempts have failed. So we do need something that's stronger. It does seem, when you read what they're trying to do, it does seem very strong indeed. But that's a reaction to the failure of previous measures, I think.
Scott?
Well, clearly there needs to be measures that reasonably prevent foreign websites which are outside of the jurisdiction of the United States from profiting on the intellectual property of creators, whether it's books, motion pictures, or television. You know, what people tend to overlook is this bill also targets things like these online pharmacies that are selling bogus medications, phony consumer goods, and the like. So, you know, the status of the legislation looks very dubious right now. I'd be very surprised if there is a way forward, as much as we appreciate the efforts of Senator Reid and Senator Leahy and others bringing it forward. I don't see a way forward right now, and which is very unfortunate.
And the accusation from lots of the big sites, especially the big American websites, is that the people behind this law don't understand the internet. Google put out a statement saying pirate sites would just change their addresses in order to continue their criminal activities. Lindsay, don't you think you're perhaps being naive about the nature of the internet?
No, I do understand that that will happen, and that has already been a problem to some extent. But you have to keep trying. You don't have to just give up, because there are people like me who wouldn't produce the works that are being pirated if they couldn't earn their living from it. And the people who get pleasure from our work would then be denied the pleasure that they're getting. I have found when I've talked to my readers, which I do thanks to the miracle of the internet quite often, that once I say, you do realise that this is how I earn my living, and that if you use the pirate sites, it's good for you, but it's very bad for me because you're robbing me, in effect, then they suddenly start to understand.
We're talking about the broad issues raised by SOPA and PIPA, these two bills being proposed in Washington, D.C. We're, of course, also getting your reaction to MegaUpload being taken offline by US authorities which accuse the people behind that website of piracy on a vast scale, costing American business millions of dollars, they say. Conrad in Nairobi, I just wondered, do you use MegaUpload? Are you going to be missing it?
Actually, I've used it on occasion. But to address some of the things that have been raised, you see, my perspective, I'm speaking as a software engineer. My company does software. I also write and blog a lot. So the issue of IP is important to me as well. My problem with the law is this. Let me use an analogy. Suppose you're the video library that lends out movies. Then somebody suspects that this library might have a pirated movie. So what this law says is that anybody providing services to this library must be stopped. For example, any maps showing the library must delete it. Any entries in the directory must be removed. Any services like credit cards must not be offered. And if you offer these services and you refuse to comply, you'll be penalized. Now, to me, that is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Because you see, if you penalize all that infrastructure, you are punishing everybody in addition to the people infringing. So to that extent, I think it's draconian in that extent, and I think something should be done to sort of moderate it. I think to find a middle ground, of course, will take a lot of effort. But the problem with the law is it only considered two of the parties. It only considered the big business and the government. It didn't consider the users. So for a law to be seen to be fair and to affect everybody fairly, it must take into account all these considerations. And I feel that it did not.
Conrad, lots of the people watching you would consider themselves users. And those of you watching, do you feel that you deserve a freedom to operate on the net, to choose which sites you use? Or do you think governments do need to make more of a stance against online pirates? You can call us up, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Just to tell you a little bit more about MegaUpload, some people believe it's responsible for 10% of all internet traffic. It's based in Hong Kong, has around 150 million users, and 50 million daily page impressions. So a seriously big website. Sheila has been blogging about this. She's a host of a radio show called A Closer Look on Relevant Radio. She's been blogging about this as well from Chicago. Sheila, thanks for joining us. What's your reaction to everything that's been happening this week?
I'm very interested in the conversation so far. In fact, I agree with I think what I'm hearing is that we do need some sort of regulation, but this is not it. SOPA and PIPA both have major problems, and I think Conrad just elaborated on some of those. This is not the legislation. There's too much There's too much wrong with it. I heard somebody liken it to shoot first and ask questions later, and too much goes down with it. You know, perhaps as he made the very good analogy to the library, that just might happen to have a film they don't know has been pirated, and then it shuts down everything. There does need to be regulation. I agree with Lindsay. Everybody seems to get that the artists deserve to be regulated, the copyright deserves to be protected. And yet at the same time, this is not the legislation. I think that the legislators in Washington who were trying to pass this quickly peeled off and quickly backed down from their sponsorship of the legislation for the reason that they saw this was not the correct legislation at this time to go forward. So I think everyone can agree. Most people do agree.
With respect, Sheila, I don't think everyone is agreeing. Scott, I don't hear you agreeing. You want this legislation to go through.
Absolutely. And this characterization that a single or a nominal amount of infringing content amongst a forest of legitimate content would precipitate action under these proposed bills is absolutely false. The definition that has to be met and has to be upheld by a U.S. judge is that a website is dedicated to infringing activity. Dedicated to infringing activity, not containing a single link or a handful of links. Now, let me ask you this. If there was a pawn shop in your town and 50 or 80 or 90% of its goods were stolen and a small amount were legitimate, would that pawn shop be seized? Absolutely. What if you had a liquor store and 90% of its patrons were underage children and only 10% were legal adults? Would that liquor store be seized? Absolutely. This is no different.
And the question... Well, I'm sorry for interrupting you. We're going to have to take a break in just a moment. So hold that thought, Sheila, and I'll come straight back to you in a couple of minutes' time. But what I was going to ask all of you watching is whether, when you hear Scott applying offline rules and offline approaches to online situations, do you think, yes, that makes sense, or do we need a new set of rules when it comes to how to regulate the internet and also how ownership works online? I'm very interested to hear from you on that. We're using the WHYS hashtag, or email us your phone number. We'll try and call you back. World Have Your Say at bbc.com. Hold on to that thought, Sheila. I promise I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes. Hi, this is Ros Atkins with you on World Have Your Say. We're talking about SOPA and PIPA, or the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect Intellectual Property Act. Two things being proposed in Washington, D.C., though we understand now at least one of them may be delayed. Let's bring in the BBC's Jill McGivering, who's with the World Have Your Say team, where all of your calls are going. Jill, what are we hearing?
Calls coming in from Nigeria, Sweden, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Somalia, those all just in the last few minutes. A lot of people being very positive about Wikipedia's action yesterday. Quite a few people saying, look, this is a victory. They really put pressure on the authorities, they put pressure on politicians, and basically they made this a talking issue worldwide. So a lot of praise for Wikipedia and the other sites involved in this for their tactics. One or two making some slightly wry comments, saying how much it made them appreciate Wikipedia, saying it wasn't until those screens went dark that they really realised how much they'd come to rely on it and to use it. Boyle said, we must stop SOPA or there'll be no Wikipedia and I can't do my research. And some people as well saying, look, we're not sure that these laws are actually realistic in terms of the implementation. The genie's out of the bottle, the flow of information is out there, people are getting used to this sort of information and access to different sorts of file sharing and so on. That's very difficult now to stop. Pierre in Cologne said it's nearly impossible to stop file sharing. Simon in the US said SOPA is swimming against the tide of history. And finally, Carl in Italy saying these laws are nothing more than repackaged government censorship.
Just a very quick question, Jill. Anyone ringing up and feeling guilty for taking files illegally?
Haven't had too many guilty callers, but we have had a few people who clearly have a vested interest and as a result obvious concerns. They're often people involved as musicians or writers, people who are saying, look, this is our bread and butter, something has to be done. We're not saying we've got all the answers, but we do need something to try and protect us. Of course, if you want to comment about this, get in touch. The telephone number is there on the screen.
Thank you very much indeed, Jill. We've got lots of ways that you can get in touch. They will all be on the screen throughout. Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Thanks for joining me here on the BBC's World Have Your Say, live on BBC World News, as we discuss online piracy, whether you're concerned about it, whether you want governments to take more vigorous action as the American authorities are trying to do, or whether we need to understand that ownership is being fundamentally changed by the internet. Let's pull up this email from Nick, who says, here we go, the internet has eroded the value of the creative arts, and he goes on there and you can see that. By the way, if you want to email us, it's world have your say at bbc.com. Let me introduce you to several of our guests. We've still got Sheila in Chicago. Lindsay is an author in London. She is live with us. And we're also joined by Soraya, live from Cairo. She is a HR manager, and we got in touch with you on Twitter because you were talking about this. And Sheila, about 2 or 3 minutes ago, I rudely interrupted you because we had to take a break. I apologize for doing that. Do go ahead and make your point.
No, the point that I wanted to go back and respond to is that, you know, the arrest there with MegaUpload shows how sometimes the system works if indeed they do have such a case as the case brought up a short time ago was, say, 90% of a site is pirating or allowing people to download, you know, pirated copies of things, then that becomes exactly how the law should be working. And the one in, I believe, 1998, the Millennium Digital Copyright Act, that's an application of that. Although that act can't be applied to foreign overseas sites that are pirating. But that's an application, the MegaUpload case is an application of how the law works. SOPA, as written, is so broad when you really read the whole bill and break it down that it allows portals, you know, such as even Google or PayPal, the way you go to pay for the, you know, for what you've downloaded. It's so broad, it brings in so many other sites. This is not the right legislation as written, I don't think.
Thank you very much indeed, Sheila. Sorry to keep you waiting. Stay there, and Lindsay, stay there as well. Let me introduce the two of you to Soraya, who joins us from Cairo. Tell us about your view on online piracy and whether we need to capture it and tackle it.
Well, I do definitely agree, you know, that we have to protect the rights of artists, intellectuals. But at the same time, piracy is not just online. You know, only 20% of the world's population is online, vis-a-vis 78% of the US population. I think piracy is a larger problem that needs to be tackled on the streets. You've got street vendors selling DVDs that are pirated, CDs that are pirated, and how does SOPA really combat that? And on another level, what concerns me about SOPA is that it sets a precedent, if you will, for repressive regimes around the world to regulate the internet. I mean, that really scares me. As somebody who's lived through the Arab Spring, you know, with the revolution in Cairo last year, where internet was cut off, I find it very worrisome that the US, that prides itself on free speech, would essentially promote some form of regulation of the internet.
Sheila?
You know, they're trying, it's one of these things, something has to be done. And so these laws were written to attempt to do what needs to be done. Most people can agree. Most people seem to be agreeing that artists have the right to this copyright protection. And yet this is not the right bill, and you express a sentiment that a lot of people are concerned about, that this is going to lead to censorship. In fact, that's what made that day of darkness for Wikipedia, that was joined by Google and many other sites in many ways, so effective, because they found one simple message that was shareable and that was sticky, and that is that SOPA is censorship. And when that simple message spread, was shared, went viral, and was so sticky, it worked, because people do see this as censorship. Along the lines, some people believe, of like China, Beijing, Tehran. It's not maybe quite to that degree, but that's how it's perceived. And this is not the right legislation for reasons that it would be too broad. It would bring in Google and PayPal and many other sites. However, it at least addresses the issue of piracy. It addresses the issue, as Lindsay said, that her property has rights, and that many other artists, we all agree, most of us agree, that those artists have the right to their royalties and to their copyright protection. How do you do that? I don't even think the legislators in Washington knew, which is why by early morning, the day that they were debating it, they started peeling away their sponsorship of this bill, their authorship of it, and saying, we'll come back at it again when we have meetings, when we let the experts come in, who they called the nerds. When we bring in the nerds who can explain to us how this all works, then we'll put this bill together again. So I think it really is something, it's a work in motion, but this is not the bill I think that's going to go through.
I think myself, one of the problems has been that the sites that are pirating are very cynical. If you go and have a look at them, as anyone who produces has had to do to see what's happening to their own work, they know they are pirating. And the existing system is that when it happens, if you find out that it's being done to your work, you then get your publisher, because normally you don't own the rights directly yourself, to contact the site and ask them politely to remove the pirated works. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they just brazenly don't. That system would be fine if the people who ran the sites were prepared to go with it, and when asked to take down something that's copyright work, they did so. But they don't, and that's why I think SOPA and PIPA have been brought in that are so much more draconian, or attempted to bring them in.
Lindsay, you're an author in the UK, Carl's an author in the US, and he says this: I'm a well-published science fiction short story writer. There are so many pirate sites selling my stories that it would take longer than forever to take them all down. I don't mind them giving away my stories, but I think it's rotten for them to charge for them. Do you agree with him on that?
Exactly. Not only is he not being paid for his work, but other people are being paid for what he has produced. And he may not mind, but those of us who are trying to pay our bills and fund our meagre pensions, and indeed pay for the very computer on which we write our work, do mind, and we should not be put in the position of not being allowed to be paid for what we produce. I think most of the speakers today have agreed to that. It's just how we go about tackling the problem that has not been solved yet, really.
But I do wonder if there's something more fundamental going on here, Soraya, and that is a shift in what ownership means. Do you think the internet is changing that? Soraya, can you hear us? Doesn't sound like she can.
I mean,
oh, there she is. Good news. Carry on.
No, I can. Well, I think the internet has really changed fundamentally over the past few years. This is the time for user-generated content. Again, I will go back to the Arab Spring example. I mean, there was a lot of effort, from the US to train online activists. There's been a lot of funding for proxy websites that help bypass restricted websites that have been restricted by legislation in repressive countries where, there's emergency law. And the essence of SOPA would make such proxy websites illegal. So I'm very concerned about, the changing landscape of the internet, where, we would turn it into more of a consumption-based internet rather than a user-generated internet.
Soraya, you're live with us from Cairo. Sheila's in Chicago. Lindsay's live from London. Let's bring in Brian, who's watching BBC World News in Canada. Hi, Brian. Thanks for your call. What's your point?
Yes, my problem with copyright is I don't object to the people who write a book or whatever getting their money and recognition for their artistic accomplishments. What I do object to is that if I go into a bookstore and I see a book written by the Bronte sisters or William Shakespeare or something like that, and in the opening page it says, copyrighted, do not copy this. What right does anybody have to copyright something that was written? And as far as I know, copyright does run out after a certain length of time.
Well, I was going to say, Brian, and there'll be people all around the world who can help us clear this up, but as I understand it, certainly in the UK, well, Lindsay, I'm going to come to you in a couple of minutes because we've got to go to the news, but as I understand it, certainly in the UK, there are laws which say that after a certain period of time, you can reproduce music and books without having to seek permission or to pay royalties. But we'll talk to Lindsay in more detail about that in a couple of minutes' time. Wherever you're watching, if you want to take part, remember you're always welcome to speak directly to any of our guests on World Have Your Say. You can get in touch on Twitter at BBC_WHYS or email us your comment and phone number. The address is worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. Speak to you in a minute. Now, a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about whether some things like very old music or very old books should be fair game online. Lindsay, you're an author. You were threatening to clear this up for us just before we went to the news. Tell us what the situation is.
The situation is that the rule of copyright in England and Britain and Europe certainly says that for 75 years after the producer of a work dies, the work remains in copyright. But after that, it comes out of copyright. And when Brian in Canada was saying, how is it that when he goes into a bookshop he has to pay for a book and it says it's copyrighted? In fact, it's not strictly speaking copyrighted if it's the Brontes or Shakespeare or someone who died a long time ago. He's paying for the actual book, he's paying the publisher. But in fact, online, he could probably read those works for free, and there is no question that that should be allowed. So the origin of this is that the producer of a work should, to some extent, be allowed to pass on what they have produced to their heirs for a while, in the same way as if you owned a factory, you could pass it to your children. And also that the publishers of the work should get some payment continuing for the investment they have, at least theoretically, put into publishing it in the first place.
Thank you very much for that, Lindsay. I'm curious to ask those of you watching, I wonder if any of you feel guilty. You've downloaded a book or some pictures or a film or some music just because you could, and then later you thought, maybe I ought to have paid for that. Maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. I'm not suggesting you should feel that way. I'm just curious to know if any of you have been struck down by guilt. Jill earlier was saying no one's called up feeling that way, but I'm curious if some of you out there may do. You can email us, worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com, or also at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. Let me pull up this blog from a gentleman called Sam on a blog called Project Darkwave. He writes, yesterday's takedown of MegaUpload is a victory for artists. Those millions of illegal files are not up there because of some utopian belief in open source freedom. They are there so people like Kim.com can earn millions a year, and Kim.com is the co-founder of MegaUpload.com. Let's go back to Cairo. Soraya, you've been saying you don't feel the proposed laws in America are right for you, but can you understand why musicians, for instance, want protection from sites like MegaUpload?
Of course. This impacts their revenues, their jobs. Of course I do, but I'm actually more concerned about where consumers actually pay for pirated DVDs. I mean, that concerns me. On my way to the studio, I passed by a small little booth that sells pirated DVDs. I think that should be more of a concern. Consumers paying for pirated products versus consumers downloading stuff off Pirate Bay or streaming stuff on MegaUpload.
It's interesting you say that. We were talking about this on World Have Your Say's radio edition a couple of days ago, and we're getting lots of calls from Nigeria saying these laws proposed in America are not what we need. We need laws that deal with trade on the street, piracy on the street, and that's being echoed by you in Cairo. Now, let's just turn our attention once again to MegaUpload, because a lot of you may have seen this on YouTube. A number of celebrities did appear in a video endorsing MegaUpload. They include big names: Alicia Keys, Mary J. Blige, Kanye West. Have a look at this.
Talking to you about MegaUpload. You know why I love MegaUpload? Because I can upload all my files for free. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Serena, and I like to use MegaUpload because it's the safest, it's the fastest, and it's the most secure way for me to send files.
MegaUpload is the fastest and safest way to move documents.
So there they are, singing the praises of MegaUpload. And of course, you can upload a file which you're entitled to and give it away to who you like. It's like if uploading files that you're not entitled to share, that people, or some people, are getting worried about. It's also worth mentioning, I think, some of the big labels which those artists are signed up to weren't overly impressed when they appeared in that video. Let's shift to Indonesia and bring in Damien Demetra. He's a filmmaker there and joins us live. Damien, what's your view of this? Are you happy to see your film shared on the internet?
Well, I'm not happy, and then something just happened quite recently. I made a movie about Obama during his childhood in Indonesia, which is called Obama Anak Menteng, the Little Obama. And then suddenly I saw in internet they have already uploaded the whole thing, the whole film. And then we write to YouTube and asking them to put it down, and then until now there's nothing happened. And more people are copying that, and that is really not fair. And in my opinion, YouTube has to be responsible for this. That's why I support the SOPA and PIPA.
But isn't the point, Damien, that of course it isn't fair? You spend a lot of time on that film and then it's being shared for free. But some people would say, tough. In this case, life isn't fair. Everything has changed because of the internet, and you just need to get used to it.
Yes, but something has to be done. Otherwise, the creative artists, they will lose their spirit, you know, because creative artists, we became more creative when we know that there is something that we can expect from what we are doing. If we spend millions of dollars, in this kind of project like filmmaking, and in the end people just watch it for free, then this is really not right.
Thank you for speaking to us, Damien. We appreciate it. There's Damien live with us from Indonesia. Sheila in Chicago, if I could bring you in quickly here. Some people online are saying, look, we've got to look bigger than this. Everything has changed. We need a new set of rules. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think we need a new set of rules. There's a middle ground here that we have to find, and I don't think we've found it yet. It's not one extreme or the other. There's the one extreme, and we're all talking about where that could go with censorship, especially with the new democracies, as we heard in Cairo, the new access to the internet. Then you start to see some censorship there that blocks the ability to have access. The whole, some people say, architecture of the internet would be changed by these laws that some people will say will mean wide censorship. On the other hand, what do you do about the copyright infringement that's so rampant right now? There has to be some ground to protect the artists. On the other hand, we can't say, well, because the internet is borderless now, it's the Wild West, there are no borders. How do you police that? You can't put out marshals to police the Wild West. Well, there has to be a way to bring down lawlessness. I saw one article, don't know if it's true, that the MegaUpload indictment said that there was even more on that site that had to do with pornography and terrorism materials. I have no idea about that, don't want to touch that one, but the Justice Department had apparently been attacked itself after...
We'll find out more details on what the Department of Justice is saying, and we'll also find out more details on why those behind MegaUpload say they've done nothing wrong. But I wonder if we could just turn to Nairobi, because we're joined again by Conrad, who runs a software company. And Conrad, I want to explore this with you. I said lots of Nigerians have got in touch saying no one respects copyright, no one respects stopping piracy in Nigeria. Is it the same in Kenya?
Largely so, because even here there's a thriving market in those DVDs and movies. But the challenge is it's an issue of convenience. For example, like now I'm willing to buy software or movies online, but when I use PayPal or my credit card, I'm told that you are in Africa and therefore you cannot offer you this service. So now my options are limited. What do I do? Yeah. So some of this is actually a cause and effect. If you enable us to access some of these things and buy this software online on these movies, maybe piracy may not be a problem. Although on the other hand, there are the people who will never, ever, ever pay for anything. Yeah, so that's a given. So the issue should be, how do we protect authors and movie producers from those who are willing to pay versus those who will never pay? So the issue of finding a middle between the two, I think, is really paramount.
But isn't there a risk here, Lindsay, let's bring you in as well, that, I mean, one of these laws in America proposed would send people to prison for regularly watching illegally streamed films. If whole swathes of a society are doing that, do you really want to see people going to prison for it?
Well, I personally wouldn't mind too much if it was my work that was being pirated. But
you wouldn't mind if someone went to prison just because they had replicated your books online?
I think you have to draw a distinction between somebody who does it once, maybe, or a few times, and someone who does it regularly, even when they're asked to desist, and who then defiantly does it. There has to be a grading system, probably, in the crime involved. But if someone persistently pirates work of any kind, then why shouldn't prison be the ultimate sanction?
Thank you very much. I wonder if those of you watching agree with that. Do you think people who consistently download illegal content should have to consider spending time behind bars? You can call us up, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. I'll remind you, if you don't get on this programme, What Have You Say Extra is back in 4 hours' time, so we might get you onto that one instead. And let's have a look at this message from Dominic on our Facebook page. I've seen many legislative attempts to protect copyright works. Whilst the intent is valid, the impact often falls on the wrong people. The technically savvy can easily hide their tracks, so it's ordinary web users who get hammered by these laws. Lindsay?
Yes.
You're advocating prison?
Well, not in the first instance, certainly. But theft is theft. If you have a system where you say that people who steal physical things go to prison. There is no difference between that and stealing intellectual property. First you get the caution, then you get community service, then you go to prison. And why should there be any difference?
Thank you very much, Lindsay. We'll go back to Soraya in Cairo and also Sheila in Chicago, as well as some other guests who are coming through in the next few minutes. First things first, though, let's take a break for a couple of minutes. Hi, I'm Ross Atkins. We're talking about online piracy on today's World Have Your Say. Calls have come in the last few minutes from Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Ethiopia, Canada, Ghana, Germany, India and Trinidad and Tobago. Thanks to all of you for tuning in and also for taking part. And we're talking about online piracy for two reasons. One was that big campaign led by Wikipedia and Google against proposed anti-piracy legislation in Washington. And then in the last 24 hours, MegaUpload's been taken offline by the US authorities, and we're talking about the rights and wrongs of that. Let's bring in a call before we go back to our studio guest. Charles called up in the past few minutes. Hi, Charles. You're in Stuttgart. Tell us your comment.
Okay, 2 points. The first, the copyright issue, very important for the people who do their hard work and write their stories and so on, and they need to be protected. But this isn't just America that we're talking about. It's a worldwide issue, yes? And it should not be protected by the USA. It should be protected by the world. And so something needs to be done, and I do not have an answer for that. But I do believe that the World Court could get involved some way, or maybe there is another answer to this. I will not propose one. Secondly, the MegaUploads being crashed out, yeah, by the Americans. Well, how can they do this? How can they even ask for these guys to be sent to America to face justice?
Well, they can quite easily do that because they have an extradition treaty with New Zealand, which is where these people were arrested. That's how extradition treaties work. So far, so predictable in terms of how the US is going about it. It can also control domain names, which is why it's able to haul down MegaUpload, at least for the moment. Thanks very much for watching us in Germany. Let's bring in 3 more people to talk about this. Soraya works in HR in Cairo. She's still with us. Conrad is a software engineer in Nairobi. But first, before we speak to those two again, let's bring in Linda. She's live with us from Perth. Linda, tell us a little bit about this website that you run and your view on this big online piracy debate.
Okay, I run a new website that's called Rap to Music, and it's all about really about getting artists and fans connected. And it's a little bit of a new business model for the music world. I've been chatting to a lot of the fans on there about this sort of situation with SOPA, and I think universally they're of the opinion that that things have changed. A lot of them do buy music. A lot of them support artists and go to gigs and spend a lot of their time and effort supporting music and have a great love of it, but they don't like the heavy-handed approach where you've got a government saying anything like YouTube or Wikipedia or anything to do with possible file sharing can possibly end up, banned or just be very difficult for the organisations involved.
Thank you very much for those points. We appreciate you joining us from Australia. Refat's on our Facebook page saying artists will lose their popularity if they support this legislation in America. Simon's in New Zealand tweeting on the subject. Content creators don't realise how much of their success is owed to piracy. Piracy often creates fans willing to spend money. Well, Soraya, that's an argument we hear a great deal, isn't it? Do you agree that piracy can actually help promote artists?
Yes, because it gives access to people in parts of the world that are not able to view U.S. content. A lot of the, official broadcasters, if you want to play some episodes or something, they will not allow you to because you're outside the U.S. So this potentially gives a lot of people around the world access to this U.S. produce, basically. And by that, it does generate publicity, marketing for products.
Soraya, thank you very much indeed for joining us live from Cairo. In fact, thank you very much to all of our guests, Linda in Perth, Conrad in Nairobi, Lindsay in London and Sheila in Chicago, and of course lots of you on Twitter and Facebook as well. Now, if you didn't get on air in the past hour, I'll be back in about 3.5 hours time here on BBC World News for World Have Your Say Extra. Looking forward to speaking to you on that. Also, if you get a chance, tune into the BBC World Service radio at bbcworldservice.com at 18 hours GMT. That's in a couple of hours' time. Jill McGivering will have an advisor to Hillary Clinton taking questions on US foreign policy. I'll speak to you very soon. Thank you very much for your company. Goodbye.